Welcome, Dan Shalit Kenig, to the podcast.
Thank you.
It's nice having you on.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure too. We are going to talk about your software, which is a terminology management app, which doesn't describe all of it, but just to give people an idea, which is called Intragloss.
Yeah.
But before we go there, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background, where you're from?
Well, originally, I'm from Israel, and I was born in a bilingual situation. So both my parents are French, and I grew up in French and then in Hebrew, which I think contributed a lot to the fact that I later became an interpreter. I've always liked languages. English is an acquired language for me, but I started up with two languages, and that's it. I'm based in Israel in terms of where I live, my family, and all that, but I work mainly in France and in Brussels. Mm-hmm. If you want to lead me a little bit, like things that you'd like to know.
So French is your mother tongue? And,
French is my mother
literally?
tongue. Yes, French is my mother tongue. It's a language in which I feel most comfortable. Although my studies were made in Hebrew and then in English. Yeah. So sometimes I think that my Hebrew is a little bit better than my French. But French is my mother tongue. That's a language in which I feel most comfortable.
And you grew up most of the time in...
I grew up in France until the age of 7. Yeah. And then my family moved back to Israel. Mm-hmm. And I was in Israel ever since, with a few years in Paris in between. Mm-hmm. And a little bit of traveling all over the world. A little bit in England and the United States. They tell me that my English accent has become completely impossible to identify. Nobody can trace my accent anymore. So that's it.
Which maybe is an advantage.
Well, yeah, sometimes.
Depends.
Yeah, it depends. It depends. Absolutely.
And would you say that because of the fact that you grew up with so many languages or several languages, is that something that sparked your interest in becoming, I don't know, an interpreter or
well, I never
to do
knew
something with languages?
I never knew that I was to become an interpreter. I actually started working as a written translator, and I did that as part of. I wanted to make a living when I was a student. In my studies, I studied something completely different. I studied musicology and psychology, and then I studied the music therapy, and I worked as an art therapist, a music therapist for several years. And then I did a master's degree in clinical psychology, and through that time, I worked as a translator, written translator, and I became an interpreter completely by chance, by coincidence. And I liked it a lot, so I've been working as an interpreter for 20 years almost, well, a little bit more actually, 21 years.
So initially you did translations in your field of expertise? Was that
Not necessarily, no. I was a young student. I was looking for a job, and they looked for a translator. So I gave them like a sample. They liked it, and I started working on books, and that's how I became a translator. And later on, I started traveling. I finished my studies. I worked as a therapist, as I said, and someone suggested maybe you'd like to be an interpreter. I was talking to someone, and she was saying, hearing your background, you might be interested in becoming an interpreter. And I said, okay, I might as well try. So she sent me to a colleague of hers who was teaching simultaneous interpreting.
In Paris?
No. That was in Israel.
Okay.
And she gave me a headset and she said, start talking. And I started talking, and I don't know until this day who was more surprised, she or I, because
you jumped in at the deep end, basically.
Yeah, and it came out as a natural, and it was apparently very good. And 3 months later, I just started to work, and
So you didn't have any formal training in interpreting?
Absolutely not. Yeah. Absolutely not. Later on, I just went to do a few courses in terminology, things like that. But no, I had no formal training.
Yeah.
And an interesting part of that story is that a few years before that, I was invited. I had translated a book, which was very interesting. The translation was a very interesting project. And somebody wrote an essay on my translation in that same place in the university.
Like a translation critique?
Not exactly, because it was a translation into Hebrew of a book called Flowers for Algernon, which is like the personal journal or diary of a mentally retarded person. It was written in the 60s, very popular. There's a theater show and all that, but the story goes like it's his diary which he writes when he's about in his 30s, and he's about to undergo an operation which is going to something in his brain which is going to turn him into a brilliant genius.
Yeah.
And so he writes a diary, and the language changes all the time based on his mental capacities that keep advancing.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So the translation is a problem because the language keeps changing,
Yeah.
and the mistakes keep changing. So
Right.
he goes from someone who doesn't know basically how to write to like a genius, and then back again because everything deteriorates and he returns to the same spot afterwards.
Ooh.
But the story is nice, but it was a real interesting project in terms of the translation that was required.
Sounds like quite a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. So someone wrote an essay about that translation, and I was invited as the guest of honor. They were very impressed with the fact that I was probably the youngest person in the room, and it was really very nice. And they gave me a tour of the premises, which included also the lab where they teach simultaneous interpreting. This was a few years before I became an interpreter.
Right.
And I said, wow, how can they do that? Like speak and listen and talk at the same time? And they said, yeah, it's a profession. I said, okay, would you like to try? I said, sure, why not? And they gave me a headset. And I couldn't utter a single word. So luckily, a few years later, I had forgotten about this because I would have said, no, I already tried that,
Yeah,
and,
it's not for me.
yeah, but a few years later, with maturation and probably a bit of traveling and age and all that, it came out as a natural. So it was interesting when we hear someone and we say this guy is never going to be an interpreter. Think again. Maybe it will change. Maybe a single sampling is not enough. Yeah. So.
That's right. And then you sort of slowly grew into the interpreting market, you would say, and then you worked mainly in Israel?
Well, I worked mainly in Israel at the beginning, and then a few years afterwards, we traveled to France because I wanted to complete my studies in psychology. And I said, okay, I'm going to have to find something to do in France. So I said, okay, I'll start like creating my own position as an interpreter.
Yeah.
And things went out quite well. And after a year or two, I started to be a very busy interpreter because I did Hebrew, but also English and French, which are my main working languages. So things led from one to the other, and it became a main occupation, a primary occupation. I never intended to become like an interpreter, and I've always enjoyed working with languages. And back to your question, I think that growing up in a family where you speak French, but there's also another language, and then moving to that country where the other language is spoken, that had a big influence on me. I remember that my parents, when I started to go to school in Israel, they used to say, I started to answer to them in Hebrew. They would speak to me in French because that was their mother tongue, and I would answer in Hebrew, and they would say, no. You have to answer in French, and I resented that. I remember we actually fought about that. There was a lot of struggling on that, and they insisted, and I'm very thankful for that because that way I kept the French as an active language.
That was the idea, probably.
Yeah. They didn't know anything about interpreting, so they wouldn't be able to say this in so many words. But yes, the idea was to keep the French active, and it worked.
Yeah.
So and then I decided to study French also a little bit and to improve my But the basic active skill was thanks to those struggling when I was 7 years old.
Yeah, it's interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about the interpreting market in Israel? What kind of work you typically do?
Well, I don't work
for companies or.
Yeah, I don't work a lot in Israel. Most of my work is in Europe because I do French English basically. It's a very small market. All languages confounded. You have, I think, maybe 80 interpreters in Israel. That's all.
That is a small market.
And AIC members, I think you have probably 20 or 22. So it's a very, very small. It's a niche market. And it's mainly a private market. So you have, and you don't have like a secretariat like you have in Paris, for instance, because there's not enough interpreters to justify that. What you basically have is 3 or 4 interpreters who also act as organizers. They're more known by companies and all that. So they have like both jobs. They do interpreting, but they also organize events. Like you have that elsewhere as well.
Right.
And I think everybody's actually freelance, so you don't have like staff interpreters. It's a very small market with the same problems and the same benefits that you will find elsewhere, like internal politics and things. They always say that when you have two people, you'll have three different opinions. Yes. So that's true for interpreters. That's
lawyers.
true for lawyers. That's true for everybody. So that's true in Israel as well. Yeah.
So let's say there's a big conference happening in, I don't know, Tel Aviv. Would they just do it in English, all English, or would they have interpreters for, let's say, Hebrew to English for those who come from abroad and don't speak Hebrew?
Well, that really depends on which languages and also on budgets, of course, because it's easy to find the English and Hebrew interpreters. When you're looking for French and Hebrew, like both ways, you probably have 3 or 4 interpreters doing that, no more. That's it. The cabine française in Israel is like 4 people, maybe 5. I don't want to forget anybody, but it's this type of number, not much more. And if you have like more remote languages, then sometimes you can't. I don't think that you can find like Korean Hebrew interpreters,
probably
for
not,
instance. Yeah,
that's quite exotic.
Yeah, so people will have to deal with English. Yeah.
And you also work for the European institutions. You're accredited.
Yes, yes. I'm what they call an ACI, Auxiliary Conference Interpreter, or something like that. So, I do cabine. I do the French booth or the English booth, and the Hebrew when necessary. So,
So, in terms of percentages, do you work a lot with Hebrew in that European context?
Well, when I come to Europe, it's usually for Hebrew. Maybe 80% of what I do in Europe, but it's not a lot of work these days. But about 80% of what I do, or 90% of what I do is with Hebrew, and sometimes it's like the French English. But this is rare. They don't need to bring me all the way from Israel to do French English. They have enough local French English people. When I used to live in Paris, I would come for both. But ever since I moved back to Israel, of course, it doesn't make sense to bring me to do French English. Yeah.
And I think people in Israel, that's my impression at least, speak English quite well. So I suppose films on TV or TV shows are often not dubbed, but just subtitled, or just in English.
I think the children are much more exposed to English in Israel than they are, for instance, in France, because there is no dubbing, because everything is in English, and also because Israel being a relatively small country, you really cannot do anything that has to do with relations with the outside without having English. You can't have a whole career only in Hebrew, like you can in France or in Germany. Like you can be a scholar in the university and everything is translated into German or into French, and you don't necessarily have to have English in some areas.
In some areas,
In Israel, it's impossible. So people have a relatively good level of English. Of course, as interpreters, we know that doesn't mean that they can speak English very well, but they can understand it usually. And if they have to speak in public, usually they will need an interpreter, except if they are experienced in speaking in English.
So maybe let's sort of transition into the software side of things.
Okay.
So together with a programmer, you have developed this program which is called Intragloss, and I think it's still a relatively recent project. The way I learned about it was, I think you approached a few interpreters, I would say maybe 2 years ago, with an invitation to beta test the first iterations of the software. And maybe just tell us the initial story of how you came up with the idea. Maybe you felt the need to have something of your own, because there are a few applications and you probably thought, it's not for me, I need something else.
Yes, that's exactly what happened. I've been having this idea for more than 10 years, actually, and I've been just, not doing much with it, not knowing how to come up with something concrete. But I've always had the feeling that preparation is, at the same time, extremely important and extremely time-consuming and not much fun.
That's true.
It is true, but it's necessary. It's really crucial. And so I thought there has to be something that helps me to prepare, and there wasn't. At least 10 years ago, there was absolutely nothing that I could find that could help me prepare in a way that makes sense to me. Like you have Word and you have database programs and you have things like that, and whatever you use, Mac or PC. But there's nothing that was really designed to do that, to help us prepare.
So basically lists, of terminology.
Yeah, everybody. Some people still use pencil and paper. But I think that it's a smaller number these days. But everybody, I found that also everybody works the way I do. So we prepare. I have a huge library of dictionaries that I've been buying all over the world. Books, which I don't use much these days, but 10 years ago I still used them a lot.
It was difficult to get in those days, so you would just jump at the occasion to buy something.
Yeah,
usually,
exactly. And I created my own list, sometimes on paper, sometimes in Word or Excel or whatever. And I realized that everybody was working like that. It was really very, very tedious and time-consuming. And I felt that I was spending my time not on the most important part of preparation, because like that, there's the legwork, which is really not really important. It's about finding the terms. That's not important. Important is like memorizing, learning, looking for other material, like really doing something intellectual with that work, not just collecting the word. So there was a whole mechanical process of preparing terminology that I thought, okay, we have to find something that helps me do that. And on the other hand, it can't be something that does it that's automatic, because it's not. It can't be automatic. You have to be able to choose to select which word because okay. So I had this idea that there has to be something better, and I've been thinking about that for many years until I spoke to someone. So you know what, you have to do something with it. I said, okay, how does one become an entrepreneur? How does one go all the way from having some sort of a vague idea into creating something that actually exists? I had absolutely no idea about how to do that. So that person I was talking to, who was into IT and IT projects, actually told me what you need to do is you have to find your better half. You have to find someone who is going to cover the technological side for you. You'll be the one with the brainchild, with the idea, and just have to partner up with someone. I said, okay. So I started looking for some people. I went to some companies who specialized in IT projects and working with private entrepreneurs, and nobody seemed to really understand what I was looking for. And then
it's quite a niche product after all. I mean,
well,
maybe difficult to grasp as well.
Yes, it is. So you had to find some. It is initially. It might not be in the end, but basically it is a niche product, and you have to have someone who really understands about that. And then I remember that I actually know someone who might be the perfect person, which is Daniel Poriles, the programmer, the chief programmer, because he's been working with me actually 20 years before on projects related to localization of and translation. So he knows a lot about translation. He understands translation much more than someone who's not into translation. He's not a translator himself, not an interpreter, but he understands about that. And has been working on projects in related areas. So I gave him a call and we met for coffee, just like we're having coffee right now. Yeah. And he said, you know what, I like this, so let's do it together. So we partnered up and we created our own company, and this is how things have been going. This was three and a half years ago. And we started, the initial idea was to create a software that would work on the web, not something that you install on your computer.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of objections received from people who, when I tried to suss things up and to see what people thought about that, and we actually created a product. But it entailed, for instance, people had to send their documents to us, to a server on the web.
Yeah, processing.
So it was a long processing. There was the biggest problem was confidentiality. They said, I can't send you documents. I can't. Even if I want to, I can't. I'm not allowed to. Yeah. And also, nobody can assure me that I'm going to have a good broadband connection in the booth and everything. So it didn't. So we realized that the whole concept of having a web-based product for this sort of application was probably not a good idea. So we switched to something that was a local, something you install on your computer and only remains on your computer as long as you prefer. If you want to share things, you can. But and we started working on that, and we did some beta testing. Actually, we did five or six cycles of beta testing. Yeah. That's when I approached you, because I started to approach everybody I could think of. I started to create contacts through LinkedIn and other interpreters networks, because I really needed people to try to tell me what they think. I wanted to see if everybody was working the way I was working, because if it solves my problem, but it doesn't solve someone else's problem, then it's not very interesting. But I realized that most people were working the same way I was, like using Word, using Excel, looking for in different websites, and There's no other way if you really want to prepare. There are some interpreters who told me outright, I don't prepare. I said, okay, fine.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I did find some interpreters who said that. They were honest enough to say it. I said, okay, so in that case, you won't need that. It's not going to be very helpful. But if you do prepare, this might be interesting for you.
It's interesting that they would even admit that.
I was a little bit surprised myself, but I did have this answer. Yeah, it was, it is shocking.
Of course, we prepare differently, and we don't prepare with the same intensity, I guess, for every job, because some things tend to repeat, or we have a favorite customer.
One of those people, one of those interpreters, he said, it's very simple. I'm working with the same group of people. I've been doing this for 20 years. Right. I know exactly what they're going to talk about, better than they do.
Yeah, probably.
I don't need to prepare. I said, okay, fine. Okay. But those who do prepare and who do like preparation and do complain a little bit about the fact that preparation takes too much time.
Yeah.
They were very interested, so we started beta testing, and we've actually completed the product for Mac right now. It's probably we're going to add features and so on, but for now we just froze everything on Mac because we're doing the Windows version, which is going to be ready, I hope, in a month or two. Nobody knows exactly, and if there's something that Daniel doesn't like to tell me, that's dates. He said, I don't know. Maybe a month, maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months, less than a year. I said, okay.
Yeah.
But
go ahead. I can cut this out if you want to have a sip, because
no, it's okay.
I don't want your beer to get too warm. That would be a shame. So that's interesting. What I would be interested in knowing is now, because you said you started with Mac and decided to focus on that, and then you'll have the Windows version later. Why Mac? Was he a Mac programmer? Was that?
Well, Daniel is basically a Mac programmer, and when we started out, it didn't make any difference because we thought of a web product. So it doesn't matter.
Yes,
so it doesn't matter. It was supposed to be browser based, and that's it. And when we decided that we want to switch to a local product, then like half the work was already done in Mac. So so we said, and he's a Mac programmer. And there's also some advantages to starting with Mac people, because people who use Macs statistically are usually more interested in technology. Very often. I'm not saying anything against Windows users, but Mac people are usually interested in technology, and they're willing to try out things. And
Macs are quite popular just in general. I mean, you see them a lot everywhere. In booths as well. Yeah.
So we started, and also migrating from Mac to Windows is slightly easier, I think. I don't understand much about the technical side but apparently there are tools that allow you to do that faster when you go in that direction.
Right.
But you would have to interview Daniel about that. I don't know anything about programming. So it was a little bit of a gamble, but we started with Mac, and it was clear. It was also easier because in a way, it's a good case study. You work with a smaller population, with fewer people. You get your feedback and everything, and if you have something that's interesting, that's worth going like on a bigger scale for Windows, because there's still, even if Macs are very popular, Windows are more prevalent. Many Windows users. So and so it was clear that if the product is successful and if people like it and if I like it, as a user, then we will, of course, afterwards develop a version for Mac and mobile versions. Because you have some strange people who prefer to use tablets, for instance.
Yeah, like me. I know.
Yeah, that's why I'm just teasing you by saying strange people, but I know it makes perfect sense, and I got that answer quite a few times. And people told me your software is wonderful, but I don't take a computer into the booth. I usually take a tablet. Well, you have a tablet version. I said, yeah, we will eventually, but yeah.
I'm curious about the process actually. So because you said you've been thinking about the product or what you wanted for a while. So did you just tell Danielle you do this and you do that, or did you sort of develop the whole thing together? I mean, the way it looks and the way it works, basically.
The great thing about my cooperation with Danielle is that we have very different expertise. What I know about, he doesn't know much, and what he knows about, I know nothing about.
That's perfect.
Yeah, it's perfect. It helps decision making very easily, because it makes decision making process, excuse me, very easy, because it's very clear who makes decisions on what.
Yeah.
So we work together. It was clear that we were going to start with the beta testing of the Mac version, and then we just we had to decide as we went along about what is because it's not only about what makes sense in terms of software, it's also about financing, because currently it's privately financed by both of us, the whole project, which costs a lot of money. So it's not like that we have investors with $3 million and we can do whatever we like. Would be nice though, but it's not like that. And because of the same reason, we don't have many people. It's not like we have like teams working for us. So it's like I do the marketing and I have the basic idea, and we develop the concepts together. And then there's Daniel and his company. So it's one or two or other more people who work in programming, but that's it. So we have to think of also what makes sense in terms of financial revenues and
priorities.
And priorities. That's it.
So what is the, because you said the app focuses on preparation. So what's the sort of the workflow, or the idea of the workflow behind it?
I actually, the whole idea was, is that I formalized the workflow that I do. And then I checked with other interpreters. That was the initial stage, to see if they work the same way. And when I was sure that they would, but you had to check that.
You want to make sure.
It made sense. So the idea is that when you start preparing, you start reading a document and then you look up terms. You bump into a term and you say, okay, what the hell is that? Or how do I say that in French, Hebrew, whatever target language you have? So you start looking up. You could be looking up in all kinds of specialized websites, like Yate or Lingui or whatever. Or you could be looking up in Google just to find, sometimes we don't get documents. Very often we don't get documents. So I have to find my own documents. I know the topic. I know it's going to be on heart surgery, and I have to, and there's on a specific valve or whatever, and I have to find documents for myself. So I'm doing a whole kind of research. So the idea, and so how do I do that? Normally what I do is I'm going to go to this website, I'm going to start looking, find a possible translation, then go back, switch back to my Windows with Word, and then copy and paste and go back to the internet and look for other possibilities. It's tedious. So the whole idea was that and usually I can define, I know in advance based on the topic, I know usually where I'll start my searches at. Okay, maybe I'll search elsewhere afterwards, but I know I'll be looking in Lingui, I'll be looking in a specialized medical dictionary, I'll be looking here and there.
Maybe even a paper dictionary.
Or even a paper dictionary. But for paper dictionaries, we don't have, the people can do that.
But you can't automate that.
Exactly, not yet. So if I can define a set of search sites, okay, out of which every interpreter can choose, the ones that he wishes for a specific search or for a specific assignment or whatever, okay, and then I read my document. Usually I read my documents on screen, not in paper, because I get them electronically. So the idea was, why do I have to go through all the process of copying? And sometimes you have so many windows open on your computer screen that the only solution is to actually create a paper list, of terminology, and then copy it back into Word, because it's easier, it's faster. So, okay, so I take notes, I write down. I said, this is dumb. I mean, we're technologists. It's impossible. There has to be a better way. So I said, okay, what I want is a basic engine that allows me to search in predefined areas, okay, and to enter what I find automatically into a list, and something that generates the table. So that's the whole idea. When I bump into a term, I click on it or double click on it, and I hit search. And then it searches that term in several windows, in several websites that I have predefined. I'll switch from one website to the other, okay? And automatically also that term is entered into the right column in my table, okay? And then I look at the different websites where the search has been executed. And when I find something that seems interesting to me, I'll click on that. And again, automatically it goes into my table, and I move on.
And all of this happens right in Intragloss. So I open the Word document in Intragloss, and then I do the search.
Yeah, you can open any document. You can open Word document. You can open PowerPoint, PowerPoint, Excel, not Excel, sorry, PDF. And so for which are the documents, I did a little survey. I asked, what sort of documents do you guys get? I know that's what I get, and that's what we get basically.
PDF, PowerPoint.
And Excel, if we have Excel can be converted into a PDF very easily. There's a function in Excel. So, okay. So the end result, and this was the basic feature. I want to be able to search faster and to organize my table faster. And then I want to be able to organize my table in a smart way, because sometimes it's very interesting to be able to organize my terms in orders of appearance in the document, for instance. And that's something that no other tool does. No database can do. So that makes sense. Or if you have a huge glossary and you want all the words that contain, for instance, the word right, like right of way, right of passage, things like that. Spelled the same way, of course. So that helps you. So that was so we started with the basic feature of searching, and then I said, okay, I have a software tool. What else do I want to be able to do that I can't do today? Another possible feature is that you can very easily compare documents. Sometimes I get documents when I go to when I do an assignment for the EP, for instance, I get documents in both languages. Okay. Then I don't need to search, but I need to identify those places in the document where the same term appears in French and in English, for instance, and I know that this is already the terminology that's been approved by the client. Yeah. Okay, so I don't need to search the internet, I don't need to search my dictionaries, but I need to be able to create my own list.
You make sort of an alignment.
Well, yeah, you have a special feature in the software that allows you to show both documents one next to the other, and to do there's a very smart algorithm that allows you to scroll them together, not just automatically scroll together, but really in a matched way, and you can pinpoint very quickly where's the French, where's the English, and again you click and it goes into your table, and it takes you 5 minutes instead of doing it 2 hours, and it saves a huge amount of time. That's the goal. The goal is to save time and to allow you to focus on the more interesting parts of preparation, not on the technical side of just gathering information and putting it into a table, which is the most time-consuming part, and it's not interesting in any way. It's not. It doesn't help you in your preparation in any way. That's not. So you want to spend your time on things that help you prepare and memorize, not on things that help you just create your list.
That's true. And I think you also have, there are a few ways to organize the glossaries. I think you can sort of assign them to a client, and you can sort them by assignments and that kind of thing.
Yes.
So you have built some of these organizing features into the app
yes,
as well.
some of these features, most of them are working. Some are still planned, not working. But because that's why, when you said it's like a terminology management tool, for now it's more a tool that allows you to prepare, to create your glossaries, and to organize them. Yes, in a very useful way. And we will add also additional management tools a little bit later that will allow you to sort different assignments in different ways. Today, I think the most important part is that it allows you to create the glossaries, and manage your documents in a very easy way. And I forgot what I was about to say. It'll come back to me.
Yeah, we can edit it out.
And you can edit that out after.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And I think I seem to remember there's also a way to reuse your existing digital glossaries. So.
Yes.
Lists and maybe that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, that's what I was actually going to say. Of course, the first place you want to search for terms is your own glossaries. Okay, so because part of the problem with the old way of working with glossaries is that, okay, so I created my own Word file or Excel file with a glossary, and it's somewhere in my computer. If I'm really well organized, and I'll have a special folder which is called glossaries or dictionaries, it'll be organized either by date or by client or by topic, whatever. Okay, and if I want, and I remember vaguely that I did something on this topic maybe 1 year ago. I'll have to start looking, and maybe I'll find that file. Maybe I won't. Maybe not. If I have a desktop search engine, maybe I'll probably find it. Yeah. But still, I don't always keep them in the right way. I don't always update them. It's a mess. And not only is it a mess, but you end up doing a lot of work which you can't use afterwards. You don't optimize your work, because if you've looked for this term once, that should be enough. But if I don't find the file, or even if I forget that I actually looked for it, okay, then all that work has been done, and I have to redo it again. You have to do it again, yeah. And the whole idea is that here you have all your glossaries that are arranged in any way you like in the same place, and you can search your own glossaries. So, and that's the most reliable, as far as I'm concerned, that's the most reliable source. If I've already looked for it, I've already done that work. All I need to do is see in which glossary it is, what did I say, what did I find, and then I decide, do I want to use it, or if I want not to use it. So that's That's another feature that is extremely helpful because it really helps you in the long term. You end up needing less work because what you've done once, you don't lose it, you don't miss it. You don't have a pile of papers or a pile of files stored somewhere in your computer, and when you have a computer crash, you don't know if it's in this backup or in that backup.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So all these problems are actually reduced, and you end up spending much less time preparing. That's the basic. And I think, well, personally, that's me. I enjoy preparation more because I really spend the time that I do spend on preparing on doing things that help me memorize, that help me understand, that help me look further for additional topics, whatever, not wasting time on the legwork.
The legwork, yeah, exactly. What kind of formats does it accept if I want to import my old glossaries that I may have on
Well,
my
if you have to
computer?
input your old glossaries, you can bring them as Excel or Word files, which again, I did a survey in the
most of
beginning,
the,
and I asked people, how do you
cases.
keep your glossaries? Some said paper. I said, okay, I have nothing to do with that. And some said, okay, so it's some sort of word processing. It can be Word or others, okay, Mac word processors and things like that, or Excel. And you do have to do a little bit of organization to be able to properly import them, but it's not much. You have to add headings like the language and so forth. This is really
Well, you probably
straightforward.
have that anyway. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
which you probably have. So yes, sometimes you have to change a little bit your existing glossaries in order for them to be imported. Properly, and. The beta testing was very helpful. For instance, there are some features that we currently have that I didn't think of, but that users actually suggested. For instance, we have a special column for acronyms, which is extremely useful.
I was going to ask about that because the database is quite flexible, I suppose. You can have comments or
and you have remarks.
and,
You can add a remark column for each language that you work with, and you can search. You can also decide exactly when you search. If you have a glossary, if it's like a not very long, 1 or 2 pages, you don't need search facilities. But if it's like 10 pages long, or if you have a long document and you want to search into the document or in the glossaries, and you want to search only in the French or only in the acronyms, or only so all that you can do very easily. So the whole idea was there was a very interesting process when I actually wrote down everything that I do when I prepare. And I thought together with Daniel, how can we improve that? What would be a miracle if you instead of doing this, what would you really find helpful? And that way, we found a few features that were really very cool. For instance, the ability to sort your glossary table in order of appearance of the terms in the document. That's extremely helpful.
It's useful in the booth as well.
Exactly. So that's something you can use in the booth. I also started with a basic requirement, which turned out to be very complicated to do so. We didn't have it in the beginning, but I wanted to have something that helps me when I do either site translation, when I get a document and I have to do it like right away, and I wanted to have a software that allows me to do what we do by hand. What do we do by hand very often? I go over the text and I use a marker, and I write between the lines because I know I'm going to have to do site translation. I can't translate everything. I don't like to use machine translation because some people do that, but I don't like to do that. And I know it's going to be very difficult, so I actually mark out those words that I'm not sure about, that I really want to search, or that I know I won't be able to remember or look up in the heat of action, and I write them down by hand. I wanted a software that does that as well, and we do that. We actually offer that.
Okay. So it takes the glossaries and sort of...
It takes the glossary and it actually merges it with a document,
All right.
and I get a PDF which shows me like in whatever color you like, and highlight in the source language, and I have the target language from my own glossary that appears right above that word in the glossary. So that's very helpful. You don't always need that because you don't always do site translation, but when you do site translation, it saves your life. So it saves time.
If you get a speech manuscript and you want to prepare
Exactly.
that, that's very useful.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's the overlay feature that you mentioned in the documentation.
Yep.
Excellent.
Yep.
And I suppose there are also a few ways to get the glossary out if you want to.
Well, you can export the glossary. You can simply export.
Colleague.
You can export it as a Word file or Excel file, which is standard. Because the whole idea was that first we wanted people to be able to also collaborate with others who don't have the software. That's one thing, and also sometimes, since this is like a subscription, you have to pay for it. Some people, want to pay. Some people decide, okay, I don't need this anymore, or I don't want to pay for this year. I don't, whatever. And I didn't want people to feel that like they're being taken hostage by the software. It's like you've been doing a lot of work with the software. It's your work. There's no reason you would not be able to use those glossaries. You won't be able to use the features of the software if you don't take the subscription. But that makes sense. Yeah. On the other hand, the work that you've done is yours. Your documents, your glossaries, everything. You should have that, and you should be able to use that.
Then so you can extract it.
Sure.
Or take it out.
It takes at least 2.5 seconds. Yeah. There's a special command like export all. You can export specific glossaries or just export everything, which is also good for like the software backs up itself all the time. But people like to have psychologically they like to be able to like, what if something happens to my computer? Will I have a backup? Okay, you can back up. You can even print out. Yeah, you can print out. You can have it in the cloud. Whatever. You can have all your glossaries in a format that you can use like with regardless of the software.
And maybe to wrap up, you talked a bit about what the plans are, but what's the pipeline, as it were? What's the thing you're working on next? Is it new features? Is it the Windows version? Or
well, the first thing that we have in the pipeline is the Windows version.
Yeah.
Okay. We have several features that we'd like to add to the Mac version, to both versions, but we're not going to do that until we have a Windows version.
Right.
And after that, I don't know, I can't tell you about the priorities because we haven't decided yet, but we do know that we're going to go also for the mobile platforms. So you're going to have a version for iPads and probably for other tablets as well, maybe iPhone as well. So that's also in the pipeline. And after that, we have all kinds of crazy ideas, but nothing is really very clear right now because there's a lot of potential here. There's potential for different usages.
Sure.
Yeah, I've had some people telling me this is good not only for interpreters. I'm a translator. I use that when I translate as well. I said, okay, that's an interesting idea. And so I don't know. We have lots of different crazy ideas, which I can't really tell you about now because they're nothing more than crazy ideas for now. Basically. I hope that what we currently have, as they say in French, sur la planche, is the Windows version, and then the mobile tablets and possibly iPhone, and then we'll see. Yeah, we're going to start doing the beta testing for Windows very soon. A few months, I imagine, probably less. I don't know. That depends on the programmers, and as I said, they hate to give me dates. So I stopped pushing for dates a long time ago because I understood that it doesn't help me in any way. What else can I tell you? No, that's basically it, I think.
And I guess the best place for people to go is to intragloss.com. That's the website.
Yeah, there's no other place. They can go to intragloss.com or contact me. And since this is a new product, we really try to well, we don't try. We actually answer every email, and I spend hours talking with people on the phone, sometimes doing a demo, explaining, sometimes getting problems because they didn't do something right, or they didn't know how to do it, or they had a problem with the operating system. We spend a lot of time on really trying to get things to work properly for everybody, because it's really the beginning, and it's important that it should work for everybody. And this is like a long-term thing that we're starting now. So yeah, the best way to find information is to go to the website or call me.
And there are a few videos as well on the website that are very good, I think, that sort of explain the interface. So it's good to
and we're going to add videos gradually, but it's so much time. I do those videos. Yeah. So I had
it's a lot of work, I know.
It's a lot of work. Yeah, it's a lot of work, and I had to start from scratch because I never did videos before. And you get all kinds of feedbacks. I had someone send me an email some time ago and said the best thing about your video is the music you chose. I said okay, and I really chose it carefully because it's something that it's like the English suites by Bach, and I love that, and I thought it was important to find good music that I like, and so I got feedback on that.
I noticed it was classical music, but I didn't pay too much attention. I focused more on the visual input.
Yeah, but I was surprised. The best thing about your video is the music. So, okay.
Great.
Yeah, that was funny. That's it. What else can I tell you?
I think that was a great introduction. Thank you very much, Dan.
Okay, well, thank you.
So this has been my conversation with Dan Kenig. I hope you enjoyed it just as much as I did. One last word on pricing, though, for Intragloss. Dan offers a subscription model. During the first year, you pay as little as $8 per month, and then later on, about $20 per month. Special rates are available for simultaneous interpreting students. Check the website and get in touch with Dan if you have any further questions. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it and pass it on. And if you haven't subscribed to it yet, please do, to make sure you'll never miss another episode. Thanks for listening, and talk to you next time.